Hey everybody, Thor here. Today we got an update from Blizzard on how Mythic Plus is going to look in the War Within. There are some changes to affixes coming, and I thought it'd be a good chance to just go through and talk about this. So we're just going to read through the post, and we'll stop along the way to talk about, what the content here is. Greetings! With the War Within beta now underway, we're excited to share additional updates regarding dungeons in the affix system. Heroic and Mythic dungeons. And some of these changes, I'll go ahead and note, some of these are already in effect in Season 4 of Dragonflight, and some of these are things that are going to kick in with Season 1 of The War Within. So in Dragonflight Season 4, we experimented with our existing dungeon difficulty progression to offer additional in-game options for players who enjoy more methodical dungeon gameplay. The updated dungeon difficulty progression is also an opportunity for players that do enjoy Mythic Keystones to have a place to build mastery over dungeons before the pressures of a timer kick in. You can read more about those changes in depth here. You can click on this link on the blue post if you want to take a look at those. We plan to continue using this model of progression into the War Within with some exciting updates. So normal, this difficulty is unchanged. This difficulty always includes our 8 War Within dungeons. So the 8 dungeons that are shipping with the War Within will always be in the normal difficulty, which makes sense because these are the dungeons that are naturally tied into the zones that you're leveling up through. So as you're leveling up and want to do a dungeon, you'll get a dungeon that is related to the content that you're doing and not a dungeon that's from 2 or 3 expansions ago because of the system that they have where they're rotating half of the dungeons season to season. Heroic. The tuning and rewards of this difficulty are increasing to be equivalent to a baseline Mythic dungeon, Mythic 0, in the previous system. With the previous system, they're talking about Season 3 from Dragonflight and earlier. So these are older Mythic 0 dungeons. If you do a Heroic dungeon on live right now, that'll give you a taste of what the difficulty that they're aiming for in Season 1 of the War Within is going to be. New mechanics and other adjustments for Mythic will not be present in this difficulty. So if there's Mythic only mechanics, they're not going to be included in the new Heroic, even though the tuning is going to be the same as what old Mythic dungeons were. This remains a queuable experience, so you won't have to go through a group finder. You can just queue up, and then you will eventually get a group. If you're a tank or a healer, you'll get a group faster, obviously, because there's always more DPS queuing up than tanks or healers. But you won't have to spend a lot of time applying to groups and getting denied and not getting in. You'll be able to just queue up and then dive into the Heroic Dungeon experience. Starting with Season 1 of the War Within, Heroic difficulty will feature our roster of seasonal dungeons. So this is a change compared to Season 4 of Dragonflight. There will be the rotating dungeon pool, so you'll have, at least for Season 1, you'll have half of the War Within dungeons available on Heroic, and the other half will be the returning dungeons from previous expansions that are brought back for Season 1. This kind of makes sense because the gear that you get from Heroic Dungeons is on the upgrade track. You can get the same items that you'll be getting in Mythic Plus, just on a lower, more entry level item level and difficulty. So I think that's probably a pretty good change. And it also really ties in with their focus of using the system to give players a chance to build mastery over dungeons before the timer kicks in. Right? So you have Heroic and then Mythic with no timer, and you have a chance to kind of learn the dungeon, learn the layout. Some of these dungeons have very different maps from previous dungeons that we've seen before, and this will give you a chance to get comfortable in the zone and with some of the mobs and mechanics that are in the dungeons before you are on a timer where you have a very clear pass-fail mechanic. Starting with Season 1 of the War Within. We already read that one. And then we have Mythic 0 and Mythic Plus. The tuning rewards of this difficulty are increasing to the equivalent of a plus 10 dungeon with affixes in the previous season. This is a change that was made for Season 4. They're not tuning this all the way up to be a Season 4 Mythic 10. That would be crazy. There are no timers, affixes, or limitations on changing specializations or talents within this dungeon. So this is a key difference between Mythic 0 and Mythic Plus. There's no timer that you have to be worried about, and you are allowed to change your gear. You're allowed to change your specialization or talents. So if you're struggling on a certain boss, you can change your talents up to be more single target. You can swap between single target for bosses and AoE specs for trash. if you want to. Usually isn't a real need to in Mythic Zero. It's not a super challenging difficulty, but it is more than it was in the past. So you have the opportunity to do that as you need to. The goal is to create a mega dungeon-like difficulty for this experience. This difficulty should present a meaningful challenge and provide commensurate rewards without the pressure of the Mythic Plus system. I haven't done a lot of Mythic Zeros in the current season, but based on the level of 2s and 3s and 4s that we did early in the season as we were leveling our keys up, I would say that they're probably hitting that target of like a mega dungeon difficulty from previous expansions. Starting with Season 1 of The War Within, Mythic difficulty will feature a roster of seasonal dungeons. So this, like Heroic, this is changing, going from Dragonflight into War Within. And we will have that rotating set of dungeons. And again, that's very much in line with their philosophy of this is a place for you to build your mastery over these dungeons. Mythic difficulty will be unavailable until War Within Season 1 begins. That's a really good thing. And I think they did the same thing with... maybe they didn't with Dragonflight. I'm not quite remembering if they did or not. But you'll be able to do these once Season 1 begins. You won't be able to do them in the 2 weeks where the expansion is live and the season has not yet begun. And I think that's fair. This gives you like a good entry point for starting to gear up once the season begins. And it allows people to have time in those 2 weeks to do things like level up all their characters that they want to play. Maybe there's professions you want to focus on. Maybe you just want to take it easy and kind of have like in a time to enjoy the new content and the new areas and new zones. Mythic difficulty will now have a daily lockout, changed from weekly in the previous system. So this is something that's new. Mythic has been on a weekly lockout going all the way back to, I believe it was Warlords of Draenor when they introduced it. Now it'll be a daily lockout, which is kind of in line with what heroic dungeons have historically been. Obviously, you can queue for as many heroics as you want to, but if you choose a specific one, you get a lockout for that one. And so Mythic is kind of filling in that same role that it's had in the past. This will also make gearing up on alts a little bit more friendly, especially if there's like trinkets or a weapon that you're chasing. In a certain dungeon, you'll be able to get one chance every day instead of one chance every week without having to go through Mythic Plus Keystones. This was already announced, but we can read through it. The seasonal dungeon roster for Heroic, Mythic, and Mythic Plus difficulties in Season 1 of The War Within includes the following dungeons: the Stone Vault, the Dawnbreaker, Arakara, City of Echoes, and City of Threads. These are 4 of the new dungeons in The War Within. And then we have 4 returning dungeons. We have Grim Batol, which is a Cataclysm dungeon. I will be very interested to test this out and see the changes that they're making to it, because there are some things in that dungeon that would be, shall we say, challenging to include in a timed gameplay setting. But I'm excited to test that one out this weekend, assuming it'll be available. The Necrotic Wake and Mists of Tyrna Scythe. So there's are 2 returning Shadowlands dungeons. Kind of neutral on these. These were 2 of the easier dungeons, at least the difficulties I pushed in Shadowlands. But I think it feels like it's a little bit soon to be bringing Shadowlands dungeons back, right? It's only been not even 2 years since Shadowlands was the current expansion. We had both of these for 3 full seasons in Shadowlands. But this is one of the things with them rotating dungeons from the past in and out, right? As they go through more and more of them, they're just going to have to include newer ones if they want to keep the pool fresh and try to dodge some of the really not great dungeons that they've made in the past. Speaking of, Siege of Borealis is also returning this season. This was one of my least favorite dungeons in BFA. I'm hoping they make some pretty big changes to it. I think this dungeon has a lot of potential, but the shenanigans that you could do with, I think it was the spotters or whatever those mobs are called, where you could basically use one mob to blow up a lot of the trash in the dungeon. I never really liked that. And the different routes for Horde and Alliance are a little bit problematic. They'll probably just say like, okay, you're always going to start in like the Horde spot, or you're always going to start in the Alliance spot. Just pick one or the other and make that the case. But I don't know. And then the bosses in this dungeon were not the greatest. especially the last boss on Tyrannical, just spending what felt like forever killing the Kraken tentacles so that you could finally actually fight the boss. I think it's got potential, but it's going to need a lot of work, and we'll see what it looks like when testing starts this weekend. And then finally, Mythic Plus. The Mythic Keystone system will carry forward changes from Dragonflight Season 4 with updates to the position of the affixes in the system and updated affix buckets. So this is something that a lot of us have been hoping for. They've made some changes to the affixes, and we'll talk about those in a minute here. The Mythic Plus system will have rewards up to level 10, with +2 starting for what would have been a +11 in the previous Mythic system. A +5, when it says the previous Mythic Plus system, they're talking about like Season 3 of Dragonflight and earlier, not Season 4, not what things currently are. A +5 should be as hard as a +15, and a +10 should be as hard as a +20 in the previous system, etc. We intend to better align reward and difficulty increases in Mythic Plus system by updating the introduction points of affixes in Season 1 of The War Within. So, at +2, we'll have Fortified and Tyrannical. This is the same as it is now. At +4, a new set of passive affixes. So this is where the new affixes are coming in, and I believe they currently kick in at level 5. It might be 4 currently. But this is a completely new set of affixes. They have done away with the current first row of affixes. So that'll be that'll be interesting to see what they're going to do and how these are going to be tuned. We'll talk about them because they do have a section on it later in the post here. +7, bursting, bolstering, etc. So they are returning the +10 row, but it now comes in at level 7. Dungeon ratings should be equivalent to what they represent in the current system. So if you do, +5 in Season 4 right now, you're going to get the same score as you will when you do a +5 in Season 1 of The War Within. So I think that's good, and it'll also make you do a little bit more interaction with the affix system as you want to push your score up, because right now you can get pretty much every reward without having to touch the level 10 affix row, which I kind of have mixed feelings about, because mostly because of what these affixes are, right? It's really nice to be able to do like all your weekly keys and not have to touch bursting or bolstering or sanguine, any of those, and still get your Mythtrack gear from the vault. But at the same time, if you want to get the highest gear, you should have to do the most challenging content. At least that's the philosophy that MMOs have gone with forever. There should be a smaller range of keystones to find keystone levels to find groups for, and more meaningful progression between each level. So this is talking about like if you queued up for a key in Season 3, you might see a +2 and a +18 and a +27 in the queue for the dungeon you were looking for. There should be a much smaller pool of sizes of keys. Sorry, that's really awkward phrasing. But like now, instead of that huge gap, you might see a +2 and a +5 and a +8. And it feels like, okay, it's more achievable to go from 2 to 5 than 2 to 18, right? Affixes. Before we dive into the specifics of the affixes, we would like to outline our goals and the purpose these affixes serve. Our overarching goal is to minimize the mechanical overlap between affixes and dungeon trash in the current design, trash design in the current +4 affix bucket. We aim to achieve this through a more passive approach, focusing on the following objectives. That is really good. Really love that. More passive approach. The more you can focus on doing the dungeons in Mythic Plus as opposed to playing the affixes, the better. I think most players share this. Affixes can be a little bit of a nice change week to week, but we don't want to be playing the affixes and not the dungeon, which is what a lot of the current affixes make you feel like. If you're a healer on an incorporeal week and there's only one other person in the group who can dispel, it just feels bad. Maybe there's no other people in the group that can dispel, which I've accidentally done to some of my healers, and I deeply apologize for that. But at that point, like you're playing a 30-second dispel simulator and you're not playing the actual dungeon mechanics. And then if you fail on the mechanics, it feels extra bad because you're trying to focus on the thing that you need to focus on, and it's just this like spiraling system of frustration. So they're trying to reduce that by making the level 4 affixes more passive, focusing on the following objectives. Shift the source of challenge in the dungeon. Shift the source of challenge to the dungeon itself by simplifying affix design and emphasizing creature abilities. This is really good. Over the last few expansions, mobs and dungeons, especially trash mobs, have gained more and more power. It seems like every mob has some kind of ability that they're doing to you, and that is challenging enough. And being able to focus on that challenge instead of affixes is a really good direction, I think. Reduce visual noise, nameplate clutter, and the cognitive load on players during trash combat. Really love that. One of the things that makes trash fun is when you can just do a big pull and AoE it down, and you get a little bit of downtime, because in bosses you really have to focus on doing the mechanics. And on trash, it feels bad if you just spend, the whole time you're fighting trash. Okay, I need to kick this mob, and then I need to stun this mob, and then I need to dodge this ground effect, and then I'm back to kicking and stunning and dodging, and it just gets really tiring after a while. Allow for varied and context-specific gameplay decisions depending on the dungeon they're applied to. So we'll dive more into what this looks like when we get the description of the affixes below. Additionally, these affixes will include a positive effect. This is something that I think has potential to be really good, and hopefully the community reacts in a way that makes sense and is positive. The aim of these positive effects is to highlight different damage types each week, allowing each specialization additional opportunities to excel during the season. These effects should feel like a bonus, offering an advantage for players at different damage profiles each week without being essential to complete the dungeon. I think this is key, and it's something that Blizzard is going to have to tune very carefully, but I think it's something that they can certainly do. Players will have an opportunity to flex toward different targets, gearing options, and consumables to capitalize on these effects. So we'll probably see a little bit more what that looks like as testing goes on. Here's the new affixes. Reckless. Non-boss enemies without mana. So this would be your melee mobs, maybe your ranged physical damage mobs. Ignore 20% armor with their attacks. Sorry, my fellow tanks. This is going to hurt. But their armor is reduced by 30%, and they take 10% increased arcane damage. So we see a little bit of both of the things that Blizzard is talking about here. They're going to ignore 20% armor, which is going to hurt the tank most. If there's physical damage, AoE abilities, this could also hurt the rest of the party, although tanks are more reliant on their armor than other classes, typically. But their armor is reduced by 30%. So this is a chance for your warrior DPS, your feral druids, your monks, anyone who does a lot of physical damage, maybe less feral druids because they do a lot of bleed damage, but anyone who does primarily physical damage will really have a chance to shine in this week. And arcane mages as well, and to a lesser extent boomkins, and maybe a little bit of evokers. Thorned. Non-boss enemies without mana inflict physical damage to their attackers when attacked, but take 10% increased holy and shadow damage. So this is a chance for warlocks and priests and ret paladins to excel a little bit. But again, this is non-boss enemies without mana. This is not every trash mob, and this is not going to affect bosses, right? So I think the impact of this is minimal when it comes to timing most keys. Now, if you're trying to push absolute cutting edge keys where you're within a razor's edge of the timer, then yeah, this may make a difference between getting you over the finish line in time or not. The part of this that has people, including myself, a little bit concerned is the first part. Non-boss enemies without mana inflict physical damage to their attackers when attacked. Because this says attacked, it specifies attacked. I'm assuming this means like physical attacks, melee attacks, melee abilities, maybe like hunters as well. I'm assuming this probably doesn't apply to spellcasters, although it may. And I'm trusting that Blizzard is going to be careful in their tuning here, right? I think some of the ways that they should do this is they should make it have like a static value. It shouldn't be percent based, right? You shouldn't take more damage from hitting your big crunchy mortal strikes than you would take from an auto attack. And I think if there's an internal GCD on this, even if it's like 1 second, I think that would honestly be pretty fine. And then this just kind of gives your healers a little bit of a chance to shine in these dungeons. This would also make Leech a very powerful stat to take on these weeks. So that's another decision that you may want to think about making. Attuned. Non-boss enemies with mana inflict 20% increased magic damage, but take 10% increased nature damage and 30% increased damage from bleed effects. 20% increased magic damage, that could get a little scary, especially if this happens on a fortified week with something like bolstering or raging. Taking more nature damage, 10% nature damage, that doesn't affect a lot of specs. I think it's primarily going to be like elemental shaman and balance druid. But hey, 10% is 10%. And then 30% increased damage from bleed effects. This has the potential to like make you consider bringing a class that you might otherwise not. Assassination rogues, rejoice for this week. They do a lot of nature damage and a lot of bleed damage. Warriors of all specs can do a lot of bleed damage. Feral druids obviously do a lot of bleed damage, so those may be some classes that get a little bit of extra love on this week. And then focused, this is the last of the new affixes. Non-boss enemies with mana have 30% increased haste, but take 10% increased frost and fire damage. Giving 30% haste to casters is a little bit scary, especially if this overlaps with like a raging or a bolstering week. Don't love that, but if you can counteract this by bringing a warlock and having curse of tongues on things, then that might be really nice. And then taking 10% increased frost and fire damage. I mean, you're probably always going to have a mage in your meta comp. That seems to always be the case. Mages are the main characters of WoW, right? But then a lot of other classes do frost and fire damage as well. So this is probably the one that is going to hit the most people, and yeah. Hopefully these get tuned so that they aren't to the point where you want to only bring classes that do the kind of damage that's being highlighted that week. And I think these numbers are honestly in a pretty good spot to start with for that direction. Note that these tooltips indicate whether the affixes apply to creatures with or without mana. These affixes will not affect every creature. So like the extra damage that you're doing, like 10% shadow damage, seems like a lot for warlocks, but it's only going to affect some of the mobs in the dungeon. Maybe most, because most dungeons, I think more mobs don't have mana than do. But we'll see how that gets balanced and how it plays out. With our new passive affix bucket set to replace the current +4 affix bucket, the following affixes will be retired for Season 1 of the War Within. Afflicted and Incorporeal. Thank you, Blizzard. Thank you for removing these. Why did you leave them in the game for so long? As someone who has played a lot of Death Knight and a lot of Demon Hunter and a lot of Warrior, these affixes are terrible, and I cannot wait to see them go. Entangling, Storming, and Volcanic. Storming can be a little bit annoying for melee, but honestly, I mean, I'd mainly tank, and I don't think it's that bad. There are definitely some places where it puts you in a bad spot, but most classes have some way to deal with it if they're really in a bind. Volcanic, if you're a caster or healer, this can be annoying, but like you just have to sidestep it, and you usually have ample time to do that. And then Entangling, this is probably the affix that felt the least impactful, especially if you just brought a paladin and you can have freedom on someone who needs it. And then to match the number of affixes in our level 4 affix bucket and align with our affix goals in the War Within, we'll be retiring the Spiteful affix for Season 1 of the War Within. The +7 affix bucket will include the following: Raging, Bolstering, Bursting, and Sanguine. Of all the affixes to get rid of in this bucket, I think they chose the one that I would have kept. I would rather see any of the rest of these go other than Spiteful, but I guess trading losing Afflicted and Incorporeal for only having these is okay. I don't like that half of the weeks now are going to be Bolstering or Sanguine. I think that those are the affixes that can be the most frustrating out of all of them. So maybe we'll see some further tuning to these. Maybe we'll see a little bit of philosophy change. But we're probably going to be stuck with an annoying affix pool in the +7 bucket. And then lastly, tyrannical and fortified affixes. We're still experimenting with how these affixes fit in with our updates. We believe these changes will offer a refreshing experience for players at all levels each season and redefine how the Mythic Plus affix system influences dungeon gameplay. We look forward to your feedback and discussions on these topics, and we'll see you in dungeons. So that's the big update to the Mythic Plus affix system. And then there was additionally an announcement of when testing is going to start. It's going to start this Thursday, June 13th at 10 o'clock Pacific time. They're doing the same thing that they have done with PTRs throughout Dragonflight and with the Dragonflight beta, where they are having windows of testing being available from Thursday morning to Tuesday morning. So basically you have a weekend to test dungeons, and then they're going to take Mythic Plus down, maybe make some changes and gather feedback, and then bring it back up for the next weekend. At least we're assuming they're going to bring it up every weekend. Hopefully they will. And all of the current dungeons in the pool will be available for testing starting on Thursday. Affixes will rotate daily on beta realms to expedite their testing. So we're going to have one of these affixes available each day. It's unclear if we're going to have Tyrannical, Fortified, or the level 7 affix bucket row. But we'll get a chance to test Reckless, Thorned, Attuned, and Focused. During the test period, you'll be able to acquire and customize the level and dungeon of Mythic Keystones by talking to the Keystone Vendor and Stormwind Orgrimmar, and the nearby dungeon teleport NPCs will assist you with transportation. We look forward to hearing your feedback. So, yeah, we're going to do some Mythic Plus testing. I am planning to do some on stream on Thursday night. We'll see how the beta servers are looking. We'll see what other things end up looking like. I think I have a healer lined up to play with me, but if you're a DPS out there and you want to join in, please feel free to shoot me a DM, and we can see if we can work that out. Anyway, those are the changes coming to Mythic Plus Dungeons for Season 1 of War Within, and a little bit of info about the first testing one that we're going to have. Yeah, if you watched this video on YouTube and you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and feel free to subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be trying to put out a little bit more content about the beta of the War Within as we get through it and get closer and closer to release. I'm going to be doing some just class overviews, class reviews. I'm going to be talking about the different tanks because it's looking like I'm still going to be tanking for my guild next season and next expansion. And we will talk to you later. Bye.